The kingdom of Eldrith was a place of frost and shadows. Snow lay thick over every hill and valley, and the wind howled like a restless spirit across the frozen fields. At the heart of the kingdom stood Castle Vielle, a towering fortress of gray stone, its walls slick with ice, its windows glowing faintly like lanterns in the endless winter night. Within those cold halls lived Prince Kael, a young man of noble blood and heavier heart. He carried the weight of his family's history, one of power, pride, and a curse that had lingered for generations. Few dared approach him, for he was as unyielding as the ice surrounding his home. Outside the castle, the snowflakes fell silently, each one a tiny crystal of winter's sharp beauty. Yet, despite the cold, life still stirred within the castle walls. In a quiet wing, away from the eyes of servants and courtiers, dwelled the royal Pups. They were no ordinary creatures, small, mystical beings whose fur shimmered faintly under moonlight and whose eyes reflected moods like liquid mirrors. They had been with Prince Kael since they were born, and though he cared for them in his own distant way, his love was restrained, buried beneath layers of duty and pride. It was here that Leora arrived. She was young, with soft eyes that seemed to see into the heart of others, and a courage that was quiet yet unwavering. She came from a distant village, chosen by the royal household to care for the prince's mystical pups. The hallways whispered of her kindness even before she stepped into the courtyard, and yet the castle itself seemed to hold its breath, uncertain of her presence. The first time Leora saw the pups, they huddled together, shivering, their delicate paws red from the cold. "Oh, my poor dears," she murmured, kneeling in the snow. She gathered them gently into her arms, feeling their tiny hearts thumping against her own. Their warmth was slight, but it was enough to ignite something within her, a fierce desire to protect them. From the castle balcony, Prince Kael watched. He remained still, hidden in the shadows. He had never seen anyone approach the pups so freely, so tenderly. He felt a strange stirring in his chest, something unfamiliar. Anger, curiosity, perhaps a hint of longing. He could not name it, and that confused him more than anything else. Leora carried the pups to a small fountain courtyard, a place where the snow had gathered in deep drifts. She lit a fire with kindling she had brought from the kitchens, careful to shield it from the wind. The flames flickered, sending soft warmth across the courtyard. Gently, she scooped snow into a silver basin, letting it melt slowly over the fire. The pups squirmed, whining softly. But as she poured the warm water over their fur, their bodies relaxed. They shivered no longer. They began to lick her hands and nuzzle against her, trusting her in a way they had not trusted anyone else in the castle. Kael moved closer, silently, drawn by the sight. He saw her hands, careful and steady, the way she hummed a soft, calming tune. It was not just the warmth of the fire or the water that made the pups come alive, it was her presence, her courage, her gentle heart. "You shouldn't be doing this," Kael said finally, stepping into the open courtyard. His voice was low, almost like a warning, yet it trembled slightly, betraying his own curiosity. Leora looked up, startled. Her gaze met his, and for a moment, the wind seemed to pause, the snowflakes frozen mid-air. She saw the hardness in his eyes, the pride, the burden he carried. But she also saw the faintest glimmer of something softer, something that had not yet been extinguished. "I'm only helping them," she said, her voice steady though her heart beat faster. "They are cold, and they cannot survive the frost like this." Kael studied her. He was used to obedience, to respect without question. But Leora did not bow. She did not shrink. She only offered care, pure and unassuming, to the smallest creatures in his life. A part of him wanted to command her to stop, but another, quieter part, wanted to step closer, to see what courage could look like in a human form. The pups, sensing the tension, whimpered softly. One tiny creature, white as the snow, nuzzled Leora's hand and let out a tiny bark. Leora smiled, and Kale felt something stir deep within him, an emotion he had not known in years. "I warned you," he said, though his tone lacked its usual severity. "And I am here," she replied, eyes bright. "I will not leave them alone." The fire crackled, the snow melted, dripping warm water over the pup's fur. One by one, they shook off the frost, their energy returning like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. They began to frolic in the courtyard, small sparks of magic in every leap, every playful bite. Kael watched, feeling a strange warmth in his chest. He had never seen the pups so alive. He had never seen anyone dare to defy him and yet care for what he cherished most. It was unnerving. And yet, it was captivating. As the night deepened, Leora hummed softly, brushing the pup's fur with gentle hands. Kael found himself stepping closer, drawn by the soft light of the fire, the sound of her voice, the innocence of her actions. He reached out, almost instinctively, to touch the edge of the basin, but froze. What was this feeling? Concern? Admiration? Desire? All of it, mingled with the heavy shadows of his heart. Then, a sudden movement caught his eye. Across the frozen moat, a shadow darted between the trees. It was quick, silent, almost unreal. Yet it carried a menace that made the hairs on the back of his neck rise. His hand tightened into a fist, and his eyes narrowed. "Did you see that?" Leora whispered, noticing his change in expression. Perhaps," Kael replied, his voice low. "Stay close to the pups. Do not wander." Leora nodded, though her eyes were wide with curiosity. The pups huddled together, sensing the tension, their fur bristling. The fire's warmth seemed suddenly fragile against the cold night, against the unknown shadow that lingered beyond the courtyard walls. Kael's mind raced. He had always kept the castle secure, its walls impenetrable, yet something about tonight felt different. Leora was different. She moved with courage he had long forgotten existed. She dared to defy him. Yet she carried no fear of him. She trusted in him, and in doing so, she had begun to chip at the walls around his heart. The shadow shifted again, and Kael felt a pull of dread and curiosity. He wanted to investigate, to confront the threat, but he also did not want to leave the pups unprotected, nor the girl who had shown such fearless care. His instincts warred with his heart. Leora, sensing his inner conflict, took a small step forward, placing her hand lightly on the edge of the basin. "They are safe for now," she said softly. "Let us finish." Kael's eyes softened, just a fraction. He allowed himself to linger, to watch, to feel something he had not felt in years. The gentle stirrings of hope, of trust, perhaps even love. The pups frolicked, the snow melted around them, and the firelight danced across Leora's face. Kael took a step closer, drawn by warmth and courage, and for a fleeting moment, the ice that had held his heart for so long began to crack. Then, from the shadows beyond the moat, a soft howl echoed through the night. A sound not entirely of this world, chilling and otherworldly. The pups froze, their eyes wide. Leora gasped. Kael's jaw tightened. The moment hung between them, heavy with unspoken fear and undeniable tension. The warmth of the fire, the playful magic of the pups, and the fragile trust between human and prince all stood on the brink of something unknown. Kael's hand moved, almost of its own accord, toward Leora's shoulder. "Stay behind me," he said, his voice steady, though his heart pounded. She nodded, her eyes wide, but unwavering. And in that instant, as the howl pierced the night, something shifted in the castle of frost and shadow. The winter was no longer just cold. It was alive, watching, waiting. And Kale realized that perhaps this girl, the caretaker of his mystical pups, was the first warmth his heart had known in a lifetime. But outside the safety of the fire, the shadow moved closer, unseen, carrying with it a whisper of the old curse that had haunted his bloodline for generations. The night held its breath, and the story of trust, courage, and the thawing of a frozen heart had only just begun. The howl from the previous night had left a strange unease lingering in Castle Vile. Even as the sun rose over the frozen hills, its weak light could not fully chase away the shadows in the halls. Prince Kael walked through the corridors, the echo of his boots mingling with the distant murmurs of the court. His mind, however, was far from the mundane politics or ceremonial duties. It was consumed by the events of the courtyard, the caretaker, the pups, and the shadow that had stirred fear into his heart. Leora, meanwhile, moved quietly among the castle's chambers, caring for the pups with steady hands. Each small gesture of warmth, each hum of a tune, seemed to breathe life into the creatures. They frolicked, played, and nuzzled her with trust that had never been extended to another human. Yet even in these moments, she felt the tension in the castle, the unspoken rule that danger always lurked near the prince. The pups had begun to show signs of magic, subtle but unmistakable. Their fur shimmered faintly in moonlight, and their eyes glowed when they were happy or frightened. Leora had noticed it the first night, and she understood instinctively that these creatures were linked to the prince in ways deeper than mere ownership. Something about their vitality mirrored the state of his heart, and that realization weighed on her, filling her with both awe and caution. Kael found her in the courtyard again that evening, tending to the pups. The snow was thinner now, revealing patches of frozen earth beneath. Leora had built a small fire, and the pups were warm, playful, and alive. Kael paused in the doorway, his expression unreadable, though the tension around his shoulders softened just slightly. "You return here often," he said, though it sounded more like an observation than a question. "I cannot leave them to the cold," Leora replied simply, glancing at the pups. "They need care. They need warmth." Kael studied her. There was no fear in her voice, no hesitation, only steadfast resolve and kindness. He wanted to command her to stop, to leave, to remember the walls that protected the castle, but something held him back. His heart, long encased in ice, began to feel the faintest stirrings of something he had almost forgotten. "Hope, you do not fear me," he said quietly. "I do not need to," she answered. "I fear the cold more than anything else tonight." Her words, simple as they were, caused a strange warmth to creep up Kael's chest. He could not understand why a single human, a girl from a distant village, could affect him so deeply. He was used to the cold of snow and the weight of duty, but never the warmth of connection, of trust, of life given freely without fear or calculation. As they tended to the pups together, a soft glow began to appear in the courtyard. The magic of the pups reacted to Leora's care, their energy amplifying with her presence. She hummed again, a low, soothing tune, and the creatures nuzzled her hands as if they understood the power of her heart. Kael stood close, his hands clenched at his sides, struggling to contain feelings that frightened him: admiration, protectiveness, longing. Then came the first sign of the supernatural threat. A cold gust swept across the courtyard, extinguishing the small fire. The pups yelped, their fur bristling, and a low, unnatural whisper filled the air. Kael's eyes narrowed as he scanned the darkness beyond the castle walls. Something was moving, something that did not belong. Leora's hands flew to her chest. "What is that?" she asked, voice trembling slightly. Kael's face darkened. "An old curse, a shadow of the past. It is drawn to the magic in these creatures, and to the light between us." He did not elaborate, though he wanted to. The truth of the curse was heavy, older than the walls of Castle Vile, tied to his family and to powers that had long been feared. He had kept it buried, even from himself, for decades. And yet, here it was, stirring once more, challenging the fragile warmth that Leora had brought into his frozen life. "We cannot stay here," Kale said, motioning toward the castle. "The shadow will sense us if we linger." Leora's eyes widened, but she nodded. She picked up the pups carefully, their small bodies still radiating faint warmth. Together, they moved into the castle's inner chambers, a labyrinth of stone corridors and dimly lit halls. Kale's steps were swift, precise, protective, and for the first time, Leora felt the full weight of his presence not as a ruler, but as a guardian. Inside the castle, the atmosphere was thick with the smell of old stone and faint candle smoke. The shadows seemed to shift in unnatural ways, and the whisper of the wind carried voices that were not human. Kael led her to a hidden chamber, one rarely used and tucked behind layers of stone and enchantments. It was a small room, warm from the torches set along the walls, and it smelled faintly of herbs. The pups curled up, exhausted but safe, and Leora set them down gently. Kael watched her, the tension in his shoulders easing only slightly. "You do not understand what you have stepped into," he said, voice low. "This castle, my family, it is not a place for ordinary courage. And yet, you walk within it, as if fear has no meaning." Leora looked at him, her eyes calm and unafraid. "I do not see courage as absence of fear," she said softly. "I see it as moving forward despite fear. And I will not abandon them, or you." Kael's chest tightened. She had touched something within him, a part of himself he had long hidden. His life had been one of frost, of duty, of distance from warmth and emotion. And yet, she stirred a longing he could neither name nor resist. The whispering in the halls grew louder, and the shadows seemed to creep closer. The pups stirred nervously, sensing the danger before any human could. Kael placed a hand on the door, murmuring a quiet spell of protection that only a prince of his lineage could command. The walls shivered, and for a brief moment, the castle itself seemed to respond, holding back the creeping darkness. "We must face it," Kael said, turning to Leora. "Sooner or later, this shadow will come to the courtyard, and we cannot allow it to harm them, or you." Leora's hands trembled slightly, but she did not move away. "I will stay," she said firmly. "We face it together." For a long moment, Kael said nothing. He studied her, the firelight reflecting in her eyes, and realized that he had never seen anyone who could inspire both trust and defiance so naturally. His heart, long frozen by pride and fear, felt the first true cracks. The warmth she carried was dangerous. It threatened to melt the walls he had built around himself. And yet, he could not turn away. Night deepened, and the wind outside howled with the approach of the unknown. Shadows shifted across the walls, and the whisper of old magic grew more insistent. Kael and Leora stood close, their presence a fragile shield against the creeping darkness. The pups curled between them, their soft magic intertwining with the warmth that Leora had brought. And then, without warning, the shadows surged through the castle gate, a swirl of frost and whispering voices, moving toward the courtyard. The pups yipped and leapt to protect their guardian, their tiny bodies glowing with magic that pulsed with fear and loyalty. Kael grabbed Leora's hand, his grip firm but gentle. "Hold on to me," he said, his voice low but commanding. "Do not let go. We will face this together." Leora nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She felt the warmth of his hand, the strength of his presence, and the courage that had seemed impossible in the face of such darkness. And for the first time, she realized that the prince, for all his coldness and pride, had a heart capable of change, capable of love, and it was already beginning to soften. The shadow moved closer, tendrils of frost curling across the courtyard walls, and the howl rose again, louder, more urgent. Kale's magic flared, bright and fierce, forming a shield around them. Leora felt the heat of the fire and the pulse of the pup's magic merge into a single force, a small but defiant light against the encroaching darkness. And in that moment, the unspoken bond between them deepened. They were no longer prince and caretaker, observer and ward. They were two hearts, standing against the cold, against the shadow, against the fears of the past. The howl broke again, closer this time, sending a shiver down Kale's spine. The courtyard doors rattled, the frost spiraling unnaturally around them. Leora looked up at him, eyes wide but unafraid. "Kale, we can do this," she whispered. He nodded, the last traces of his hesitation melting away. "Together," he agreed. And just as the shadow surged toward them, a brilliant flash of light erupted from the pups, their magic combining with the warmth of the fire, the courage of Leora, and the strength of Kale. The darkness recoiled, retreating into the night with a chilling scream, leaving the courtyard trembling in silence. Kale lowered his hands, breathing heavily. Leora knelt beside the pups, checking them over. They were unharmed, their little hearts still beating strong. For a moment, the only sound was the crackle of the fire and their own breathing. Kale turned to her, his face softer now, a shadow of a smile appearing. "You have changed this night," he said quietly. "Not just for the pups, but for me. Perhaps even for the castle itself." Leora's eyes met his, warm and steady. Outside, the snow glimmered faintly in the moonlight, the shadow gone for now but leaving a warning in its wake. The castle was safe, but the danger of the supernatural and the curse that lingered was far from over. And deep within Kale, a realization began to bloom. The frost in his heart, once impenetrable, had begun to thaw. The warmth of courage, trust, and gentle love was breaking through. But the path ahead was uncertain, and the trials that awaited them were far greater than a single night's shadow. The winter had not ended. The curse had not yet lifted. Yet, for the first time, Kale felt a glimmer of hope. And with Leora by his side, he knew that perhaps even a frozen heart could find its way back to life. The night had passed, leaving the castle of Vielle quiet, yet heavy with anticipation. Snowflakes drifted lazily from the sky, covering the courtyard in a soft, shimmering blanket. The pups, now fully recovered from their frostbitten ordeal, played and tumbled across the courtyard, their little bodies radiating warmth and magic. But the castle itself seemed to hold its breath. The shadow from the night before had not disappeared, it lingered in whispers, in frost along the walls, and in Kale's uneasy heart. Prince Kale walked the corridors, his mind restless. For the first time, he had felt his own vulnerability, the fragile stirrings of trust, affection, and perhaps even love. And for the first time, he had allowed someone to care for what he cherished most, the pups, the remnants of his family's mystical lineage, and, unknowingly, himself. Leora moved beside him, carrying a small basket filled with herbs and warm water. The pups followed her like a river of light through the shadows, their magical glow reflecting off the stone walls. Kale's eyes kept drifting to her, noting the steady rhythm of her movements, the calm determination in her gaze. She was no ordinary girl. She had faced his temper, his pride, and the shadow of the curse without flinching. And through her courage, she had begun to thaw the ice that had held his heart captive for years. "The shadow is clever," Kale said quietly, breaking the silence. "It seeks the pups, but also, it tests us. It wants to see if our hearts are strong enough to face it." Leora looked at him, her brow furrowed slightly. "Then we are ready. Whatever comes, we face it together." Kale hesitated. "You do not fully understand the danger. This is no ordinary threat. It is older than this castle, older than any living memory. It is tied to my bloodline, to the curse that haunts my family." She met his eyes, steady and unafraid. "Then we face it with everything we have. I trust you, Kale, and you can trust me." For a long moment, the prince said nothing. Her words, simple and pure, pierced the layers of frost that had encased his heart. He had been taught to rely on no one, to trust only in himself and in the cold rules of the court. And yet, here was someone asking him not just to fight, but to believe in the power of connection, of courage, and of love. A sudden gust of wind rattled the courtyard doors, and the shadows gathered again, swirling like smoke. The pups barked and yipped, their magical glow brightening in warning. KL drew his sword, its blade shimmering faintly with enchanted runes, a weapon passed down through generations to combat the supernatural. Leora stood beside him, her hands free but her heart steady, ready to act, ready to protect the creatures and the man who had begun to soften before her eyes. The shadow coalesced, a swirling mass of darkness and frost, tendrils reaching out toward them. Its eyes glimmered like broken stars, and a low, chilling whisper filled the courtyard. Kale stepped forward, placing himself between the shadow and the pups. "You will not harm them," he shouted, voice echoing through the courtyard. Magic pulsed along his blade, bright and fierce, a shield against the encroaching darkness. The shadow recoiled, then surged forward, faster than any human could move. Leora's eyes widened, but she did not hesitate. She gathered the pups close, whispering a soft tune that had become almost like a spell in her hands. The creatures responded instantly, their magical glow expanding, intertwining with Kale's power. Together, they formed a living barrier of warmth, light, and courage against the cold darkness. Kale felt the force of the shadow pushing against him, testing every ounce of strength, every bit of magic he could muster. But it was not strength alone that held the darkness at bay. It was Leora's presence, her courage, her unwavering trust. He realized, in that moment, that love itself could be a weapon, as powerful and enduring as any spell or blade. The shadow shrieked, a sound that shook the walls of the castle and rattled KL to his core. It surged once more, tendrils of frost reaching for the pups, for Leora, for the warmth that had dared to challenge it. Kael's hand gripped her shoulder, steadying both himself and her. "Do not fear," he whispered. "I am here. I will not let it touch you or them." Leora met his gaze, her eyes full of trust and determination. "I do not fear you," she said softly. "Not now. Not ever." In that instant, something shifted. The shadow paused, sensing the unity, the strength born not of magic alone, but of hearts joined in trust and courage. KL felt it, the pulse of warmth flowing from Leora, through the pups, and into himself. The frost on his heart, centuries of pride, fear, and pain, began to crack and melt. With a sudden surge, Kale raised his sword high. A beam of pure, golden light shot from the enchanted blade, striking the shadow at its core. The darkness writhed and twisted, a scream filling the courtyard as the magical energy of the pups and Leora's courage joined with the prince's power. The shadow recoiled, then shattered like ice under the midday sun, dispersing into the night with a final, echoing howl. Silence fell over the courtyard. The snow glistened in the pale moonlight, untouched now by darkness. The pups yipped happily, tumbling in the snow, their magic calm and steady once more. Kale lowered his sword, breathing heavily, his eyes fixed on Leora. She stepped closer, brushing a few stray snowflakes from his shoulder. Her hands were warm, gentle, and alive. Kale felt the last of his frost crumble, leaving only the warmth of something he had not allowed himself to feel in years. Hope, trust, and a fragile kind of love. "You saved them," he said softly, voice breaking slightly. And you saved me. In ways I did not know I needed. Leora smiled, the light of the fire and the pups reflecting in her eyes. We saved each other, she replied. That is what courage does. It does not act alone. For the first time, Cale allowed himself to reach out fully, taking her hand in his. The touch was electric. Not with passion, but with the quiet intensity of trust and shared experience. The frost of years melted completely from his heart. He saw not just a caretaker in Leora, but a partner, a companion, a beacon of warmth in a world that had long been ruled by cold and shadow. The pups circled around them, small and magical, their eyes glimmering with light and joy. Cale knelt, gathering them close, and Leora joined him, her hands brushing gently over their fur. In that moment, the courtyard was filled with warmth, love, and the quiet magic of healing. The storm of the night had passed, but the memory lingered. Cale and Leora understood that the shadows of the past were not fully gone. They would always be part of the castle, part of the prince's legacy. But they also understood that together they could face whatever came next. The frost would never claim them again. Not while they held trust, courage, and love in their hearts. As dawn broke, the snow began to melt in earnest, revealing patches of green beneath. The castle seemed to breathe anew, the magic of the pups and the courage of Leora seeping into its very stones. Cale stood, taking her hand in his once more. We have faced the darkness, he said softly. And now, we begin anew. Leora nodded, her eyes shining with a mixture of relief, pride, and joy. Together, she said. Cale smiled faintly. The first true smile he had allowed himself in many years. The frost was gone, replaced by warmth, and for the first time, he felt a future that was not ruled by fear or curse, but by hope and love. The pups barked and yipped happily, dancing around them in a circle of light. Cale bent down, gathering them one by one, and Leora joined him, brushing their fur gently. The magic in their small bodies pulsed softly, steady and strong. It was a reminder that life, love, and courage were more powerful than fear, more enduring than any curse. And as they stood together in the early morning light, the first rays of sun catching the castle towers, Cale realized something profound. The heart could thaw, even after centuries of cold. And in that thaw, even the smallest spark, trust, courage, love, could ignite a warmth that would last forever. Outside the castle, the snow continued to fall gently, but it no longer carried the weight of dread. Instead, it reflected the quiet magic of hope reborn. Cale and Leora stood hand in hand, surrounded by the mystical pups, the castle, and a future that was theirs to shape together. For the first time in his life, Cale allowed himself to believe that love was not weakness. It was the truest strength of all. And in that belief, his heart finally softened. The winter had passed. The shadow had retreated. And a new chapter began for the prince, for the caretaker, and for the mystical pups who had brought warmth to the coldest heart in the kingdom.